Welcome back to the 2024 APAICS Tech Summit. I'm Madeline Milka, President and CEO of APAICS. Our next panel is Spectrum 101. What is Spectrum? Spectrum is how we communicate, receive information, and do everything online and over the air. From the basics of spectrum allocation to its effects on connectivity and communication, we'll explore how spectrum management shapes the digital landscape. We'll also discuss the implications for the AA and NHPI communities, ensuring that their needs are considered in spectrum policy and access. I'm delighted to introduce KPEC Executive Member Congressman Andy Kim. Congressman Kim represents the 3rd Congressional District of New Jersey and has dedicated his life to serving this country. He worked as a career public servant under both Democrats and Republicans, having served at USAID, the Pentagon, the State Department, the White House National Security Council, and in Afghanistan as an advisor to Generals Petraeus and Allen. In the House of Representatives, Congressman Kim serves on the House Armed Services Committee and serves as ranking member on the Subcommittee on Military Personnel. He also serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and House Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. Please welcome Congressman Kim to the APAICS Tech Summit.
Hi everyone, I'm Congressman Andy Kim, and just want to say welcome to the APAICS Technology Summit. I'm glad that you all are joining up and participating in this. Right now, we live on the cusp of a incredible and exciting moment for innovation, not just in America, but in this world right now. We're going to see technology advancing at such an exponential rate. It is simultaneously exhilarating, but also a little scary. And it's important that we be thoughtful and strategic with how we go through this. Whether that's AI or what we're engaged on now when it comes to spectrum, and just the ability to make sure that the technology is advancing with the velocity that we want it to, but also that it is available to all that should be able to participate, take part, as well as help grow. And that's something we have to be really mindful about. When it comes to spectrum, when you're talking about sort of how to be able to divide up and think through using that type of capacity, thinking through the role of the API community, to think through the different types of businesses that should have the capacity to be able to engage, incredibly important. So I know I keep this on my mind a lot in the work that I've done, and I'd love to be able to continue that conversation with all of you, thinking about how we can grow our innovation, but grow it in the right way that can really try to lift up as many Americans as humanly possible. So I hope you have a great discussion today, and look forward to staying in touch.
Our moderator for this panel is Mary L. Brown. Mary is the Executive Director of Wi-Fi Forward, an organization of entities seeking to promote and advance public policies that enable Wi-Fi technologies. Mary is a spectrum and technology policy expert with decades of experience in Wi-Fi, as well as other wireless technologies. Her expertise includes a stint on the National Telecommunications and Information Administration's Commercial Spectrum Management Advisory Council, providing testimony at multiple congressional hearings, and advocating on spectrum issues before the Federal Communications Commission. Please welcome Mary and our panelists.
Hi, welcome to this session on spectrum, sponsored by APAICS, talking with industry experts and government experts about what's going on in the fascinating area of radio spectrum. So what I'd like to do first is have each of our panelists say who they are, what the organization is that they represent, and also tell us on a personal note something that they are currently loving about radio technology or radio devices, something that they're using in their personal life that's particularly interesting to them now. So let's start with Michael Ha of the FCC.
Hi, thank you, Mary. This is Michael Ha. I'm the Chief of Policy and Rules Division at Office of Engineering Technology at the Commission. Office of Engineering Technology is an advisor to the Commission on technical subjects. And we've been recently engaged in various rulemaking proceedings including providing more spectrum for the wireless broadband services, satellite communications, as well as unlicensed services. Technology that interests to me a lot these days has to do with some of the autonomous driving. It's very fascinating technology that involves multiple techniques, including obviously there's a wireless communications, but there's a lot of detection technologies to make sure that the drivers are still paying attention to the road, and then the safety of the vehicle operation itself, including various the vehicular radar technologies, as well as other sensors to make sure that your vehicle stays in lane and make sure that you don't cause any accidents while you're driving. Thank you, Mary.
That's fascinating. Are we going to see autonomous driving in our lifetime, Michael?
I think it's there. A lot of people are still relying on it, although I'm a little skittish to rely my life and my family's life completely on a machine yet. But I think we're getting there. Thank
But
you.
we'll get there. We'll get there if we have more spectrum and more bandwidth and better technology. Okay, that's interesting. Fred Matos from NTIA, please say hello.
Yes, thank you very much, Mary. My name is Frederick Matos, and I'm a senior spectrum manager with the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Here in the United States, as we'll talk about a little bit later, we have two regulatory agencies. We have Michael Haw from the FCC, and I'm with the NTIA. And we sort of divide the radio spectrum management responsibilities between the two agencies. My background is sort of began when I obtained an amateur radio license as a teenager, and that led to my career. And I am as far as loving parts of the use of the spectrum, I'm a very active amateur radio operator, ham radio operator, if you will, slang term. So I communicate with people all over the world using the high frequency bands from 1.8 actually it's 1.8 megahertz up to 30 megahertz, called a shortwave band. So now I've communicated with China and Siberia and Japan, Cambodia, India, Russia, and so forth. And I really enjoyed that. It's a pleasure for me. And of course, the ionosphere is not always a constant. It varies all over. So it's difficult to predict sometimes when I can communicate with China and Japan and even Europe. So that's one of the challenges we have. So I really enjoy the hobby.
So you actually have a radio station at your house with a big old antenna, right? That allows you to communicate across continents.
Yes, I can show you. The screen is actually showing a little bit of the radio right there. I can see the swinging around a little bit. So I actually use a home office and my station is all together here in one location. So
That's fascinating. Okay. Rikkin Thakker of NCTA.
Hey, Mary. Hey, everyone. Rikkin Thakker, the Chief Technology Officer at NCTA, the Internet and Television Association. I lead NCTA's technology efforts and industry's interest in technopolicy, standards, and guidelines in various technical areas such as broadband internet performance, cybersecurity, AI, and of course, wireless spectrum. And thank you for this opportunity to participate and share our views on this topic. For those who don't know us, NCTA is the principal trade association for the US cable industry, representing cable operators that serves more than 80% of the nation's household. That includes Charter as well. And of course, more than 200 cable program networks. And we are the nation's largest, our industry, cable industry is the nation's largest residential broadband provider, have invested more than $310 billion over last 2 decades to build high-speed networks in both rural and urban communities. Going to your second question on a personal note of what I like. I mean, there are a lot of wireless and connectivity solutions that I like and choose to I have to choose from, but I would actually go with the basics, and that is just simply Wi-Fi. I mean, this technology is glued to everything that connects in our households, all types of IoT devices, mobile, stationary devices, and long ago, actually, when I bought our first baby video monitoring system, I mean, I was amazed that how Wi-Fi actually and number of other short wavelength technologies actually allow this kind of devices to function seamlessly. It was amazing, and now we rely on our Ring doorbells and home monitoring systems, everything. I mean, it's amazing.
Great, great. Thank you. Okay, Virginia.
Thanks so much, Mary. Hi, my name is Virginia Zigras. I'm the Vice President of Legislative Affairs at Charter Communications, or you might know us as Spectrum, which is our consumer-facing brand. Charter is a leading connectivity company. We offer broadband, mobile phone, video, and voice services to more than 32 million customers across 41 states. And we have 875,000 miles of network infrastructure. So we are a connectivity company that is really knee-deep in building the necessary infrastructure for communities to connect. Our network really is offering gigabit speed internet service to more than 57 million US homes. And we have been a major participant in the US wireless space for a long, long time. We are a Wi-Fi provider. We have nearly 500 million IP devices attached to our network. And so really, we are very comfortable talking about wireless from the start, and then looking to the future in terms of shared and coexistence technologies as a CBRS license holder. We launched Spectrum Mobile in 2018, and we're now one of the fastest growing mobile providers in the US with approximately 8.8 million mobile lines. So we're excited to engage in this conversation with you. What I'm currently loving about Spectrum is really about seeing the US take an increasing leadership position worldwide, developing technologies and policies to support shared and coexistence regimes, letting Spectrum policy, taking Spectrum policy to the next level, thinking about next generation Spectrum use, finding ways to be efficient with a very scarce resource that we have today, and really looking to the future, what policies, what technologies can we be investing in to really be driving continued expansion in the Spectrum marketplace. So thanks. Looking forward to chatting soon.
That's a great point, and it's an honor that we get to have because of the good work of Michael's agency and Fred's agency, and we're going to circle back to coexistence and sharing during this conversation because it's so important. So thank you. Well, one of the first questions people who are not as knee-deep in Spectrum as you guys are might have is, what is radio spectrum anyway? So Rikkin, can you enlighten us?
Sure. Yeah. Well, in a way, we all have been introduced to Spectrum in one way or another. I mean, it is very crucial for connectivity, as Virginia, Michael, and Fred mentioned. But if you remember ROY-GBU, that's the acronym for the colors that make up the visible part of the spectrum. That's the spectrum we see. For wireless communication, it is the invisible portion of the radio frequencies that wireless signals travel over. And if you want to just think about spectrum in general, it's actually the electromagnetic spectrum that ranges from 3 hertz to 300 exahertz. And let me back up. Hertz is actually the unit in which we measure the frequency of the spectrum. It is nothing but the number of cycles in 1 second, and that gives us frequency, basically how frequently the signal oscillates in 1 second. So for wireless communication, it takes place over a small portion of this entire electromagnetic spectrum, and that ranges from 20 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz. The key thing, I think, for this discussion and for our viewers to remember is that And before we dive into this discussion of shared versus unlicensed and so forth, that spectrum is a finite resource. It needs to be utilized more efficiently. You cannot destroy it. You cannot generate new. The good news is that we can all share this, and that's where the spectrum coexistence concept come into play, and we can talk more about that.
Great. Fred, do you have anything to add on
Yes,
what
we normally consider the spectrum from 9 kilohertz to 3,000 gigahertz because that's where the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, has it in its radio regulations that are treaty status. So that, but it's a limited but renewable public resource. It's but it's for another challenge sometimes is the spectrum is not confined to within your borders. This becomes very important for countries that are closer together, such as Europe, Africa, and some of the Asian countries, which these cross-border situations have to be resolved, and spectrum has to be the agreements have to be reached between the various countries there. The use is managed by international treaties, the spectrum regulations, international treaties, and by national regulations. We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. And the spectrum is really vital to our economic and social and cultural life as we live it every day. We use our iPhones and listen to the radio, watch television, and so forth, and use the Wi-Fi as I'm using you right now to access my computer to the internet here. And it's critical to essential government missions, federal government agencies. We have the Weather Bureau doing weather forecasts. We have the Law Enforcement Federal Bureau Investigation. We have the Federal Aviation Administration that does the aeronautical radio navigation and aeronautical communications for our national airlines and aircraft. And so it's critical essentially to various services here.
Great. Yeah. I mean, people don't often think about that, but our ability, this time of year to predict hurricanes, right? Or our air safety, all of these things use radio spectrum, and those are federal agencies that are providing those services to all of us. So it's a great thing, not to mention the Department of Defense, which has many use cases as well, trying to keep our country safe. While we're on this topic of use cases, Michael, from a FCC commercial perspective, do you want to give a little bit of an overview of the kinds of commercial examples on spectrum use that people might not think of?
Yeah, sure. Obviously we all are familiar with the communication portion of the use of spectrum. Whether it's a mobile broadband services, including LTE 5G networks or the unlicensed Wi-Fi services, but also the same spectrum is being used for maritime, the satellite communications, aeronautical communications, traffic control tower to airplanes. But also this spectrum is being used for a lot of other purposes. For example, a lot of these imaging devices, construction settings, people want to know what's under the ground before they start digging. And we use something called a ground penetrating radar to get an image of what's underneath it. Also, when you walk through the airport gates, we do have some safety checks to make sure that you're not carrying anything that you're not supposed to be carrying. And these object detections, whether it's knives or guns or whatnot, they're all using spectrum to sense that. And also there's another segment of spectrum used by a scientific community. So we use the spectrum to monitor the universe using the what's called the radio astronomy. These are big telescopes that's making observation in the sky, tracking a lot of different stars and how the galaxy is expanding. That's all using the spectrum. And also we have a lot of satellites up in the sky, what we call the Earth Exploration Satellite Services, where they're just listening to these natural vibration from the Earth, whether it's oxygen molecules or some other elements, so that they get a very important data on how the Earth is evolving and that feeds into a lot of scientific use. So those are only the few to name, but there's a lot more extensive use of a spectrum that basically keeps everybody moving, keeps the trains moving, keeps the airlines to continue to fly, and while providing a lot of safety services by our public safety, the military to protect our nation, as well as our personal use at home using Wi-Fi.
Yeah. It's an amazing thing how many ways we can use spectrum, and it seems to be expanding all the time. Before I go to the next question, Virginia or Rikkin, do you have anything to add?
Well,
Go ahead.
I'll just quickly add that, from cable companies' point of view, our members operate some of the nation's largest Wi-Fi networks, and several of our members, including Charter, Spectrum, they offer mobile services as mobile virtual network operator, MVNOs, while owning spectrum and also leasing capacity from other operators. And combined, our industry is the fourth largest operator in the nation today. So our members, of course, offer connectivity through a number of solutions that includes Wi-Fi, 5G, and also, of course, wireline mediums to our consumers or customers actually in innovative ways. So one thing I would just simply say is that spectrum actually allows us to bring this sustainable competition and helping millions of consumers actually.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Okay, so we've got spectrum. We've got all these uses for it. We know it's a natural resource. It's finite, but renewable. So that suggests we need to in some way manage it, and it is the role of government to do that. So let me turn it over first to Michael and then to Fred to talk about what their agencies do. What is the government's role with spectrum management?
Yeah, so I'll go first, Fred. So, the agency that I work for, the Federal Communications Commission, we manage the spectrum use for the non-federal users or the commercial use. We all, both the federal and non-federal users, we do have a master blueprint called the spectrum allocation table, where we specify what part of the spectrum can be used for different services. For example, there's certain parts of spectrum that's dedicated for radio location, also known as radars. There's a certain portion of a spectrum that's dedicated for fixed point-to-point microwave links. There are certain parts of spectrum that's dedicated for broadband mobile services, the satellite services. So that's how we do, and it's very similar to the land management that you might be familiar with. There are certain zoning systems that you can do residential homes, high-density condominiums, commercial buildings, and so that map has been already created and agreed by everybody, and that's a public record you can see. From the policy perspective, Commission has been adopted what's called the flexible use of the band. Unlike European countries and some other countries where government dictates what technology can be deployed in a given band so that they manage the process, the technology, as well as the market, whereas in the United States, since the late 1990s, Commission has been relying on this flexible use of a spectrum where we set the ground rules of what needs to be done and how to protect other incumbents and your neighbors. But the licensee is free to compete in the space with the best technology that makes sense for their business. And that freedom really created a lot of competition. And they made a lot of success, especially with largest carriers in the United States competing with the cable companies. And also the manufacturers competing for their business. I think this has been a great success for the overall communication industry in the United States. And we also effectively compete against our competitions in global sense, where others are trying to be a fast follower to decisions we make here in the United States. And also we try to retain our global leadership in many fronts when it comes to spectrum management, as well as the certain technology that are being deployed in upcoming bands that we're still trying to free up.
Great. Yeah, and I know there's a lot of governments who are looking over our shoulder at our flexible spectrum use policies and looking to adopt those as well, seeing the great success that we've had there. Fred, tell us about what the NTIA does for spectrum management.
Well, the NTIA regulates all of the federal government, federal agency use of the radio spectrum. In other words, we don't issue what licenses like the FCC, Michael Ha does. We issue what's called spectrum authorizations or frequency assignments to the federal agencies. So that's one of our major processes. We also certify federal government systems, so to assure that there's compatibility and they're going into correct frequency bands and they have technical standards before the executive office of the president and the office of management and budget has issued a regulation for us, so we have to certify that the spectrum is available before a federal agency can spend millions of dollars on their radars or whatever they're procuring. So Michael mentioned that table of frequency allocations, which is important because we both have a table of frequency allocations. United States does actually. So it's similar, and the FCC has part of it and the NTA has part of it. And much of the spectrum is actually shared between the two agencies. So we have to get together. There's a memorandum of agreement between the FCC and NTA, how we do this negotiation and agreements and so forth. One example, Michael mentioned airport security devices, and the recent issue between FCC and NTIA is that a company had applied for a new airport security device that uses the radio spectrum. And this particular spectrum was actually used by radio astronomers. So the radio astronomers were very concerned that this new device is going to interfere with their space research and looking at the next galaxies and so forth. So Michael and I had to look it down and see if indeed this system will be compatible. And we agreed, yes, it will be. The manufacturer did provide information, so we concluded that would not interfere with the radio astronomers, and the FCC then was free to issue their approval of this particular system. So that's an example of both the FCC and NTIA working together to achieve an agreement to permit spectrum use for this important service.
Great. That's a wonderful example. Thank you for sharing that. So I want to get to a question that has always been a difficult one, at least in my career in the wireless space, which is, this radio spectrum stuff that was discovered way back in the late 1800s and it was sort of commercialized around the 1920s with the first AM radio stations and maritime communications. But that was way before we had computers and satellites and most modern technology, right? Digital wasn't invented yet. So we've had to really change the way we use spectrum over time. We've had to move from using it for one thing to maybe using it for another thing, or maybe using it for multiple things. And so I'm hoping each of you can give me an example of that from your background. And I think I'd like to start with Rikkin on the 6 gigahertz transition.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. It's a great question, Mary. So I think when we talk about 6 gigahertz, I want to explain where it is being used right now in the USA, in US, right? It's mainly the unlicensed spectrum, and it is a big part of connectivity solutions. Wi-Fi, as we know, is the most dominant unlicensed technology, and it is the connectivity backbone for the consumers. And whenever we are inside, indoors, and oftentimes outdoors, we rely heavily on Wi-Fi for offloading our data. This may be a surprise to many, but it is actually, this number has been steady, that more than 80% of mobile traffic is actually going on Wi-Fi. And worldwide, the share of all internet traffic on Wi-Fi network is actually growing, and it's going to be about 66% by the end of next year, right? And if you look at how many devices we have in our homes, average American households right now have about 25 connected devices. Think about that. And when all of this is wonderful, but it would only work if we have sufficient unlicensed spectrum available, right? So we want to make sure that that enough of is available. And FCC, I mean, kudos to Michael, you and FCC in general. You did something wonderful in 2020. FCC made the 6 gigahertz band available, full 1200 megahertz for unlicensed and Wi-Fi operations. And this allowed the growth of sixth generation of Wi-Fi. We are actually now entering into the seventh generation of Wi-Fi soon. So the 6 gigahertz band, the entire 1200 megahertz, it's been a huge success. The band is being continued to be used by the Wi-Fi devices, and this growth and innovation is continuing. By the end of last year, actually, in 2023, we had about 19.5 billion Wi-Fi devices connected, and over 500 million of those devices actually were using 6 gigahertz band. So it's been a tremendous success, but we should not stop here. In few years, Wi-Fi 8 is going to come. And of course, consumers are constantly demanding faster networks that can handle extremely low latency applications such as AR, VR, and online gaming and so forth. So we definitely want to keep monitoring the usage of unlicensed spectrum. It is getting crowded, of course, and there is a possibility to bring additional unlicensed spectrum out through 7 and 8 gigahertz, and we should definitely explore those bands as well. So,
I don't want to leave this topic without extending kudos again to the FCC. That ban was already in use when the unlicensed community came and said, may we please expand into it. So there were microwave point-to-point links that were used by electric utilities and others. There was satellite uplink that was used by a variety of companies. And so there was a rather extensive technical examination, and Michael has all the scars on his back from this, to determine under what conditions could Wi-Fi enter the band. And ultimately, the FCC decided there were good conditions that would enable it. The success of that decision is everything you just said, Rikkin, just phenomenal success since the 2020 decision. So I didn't want to leave the topic there. Virginia, an example of bands and spectrum in transition.
That is a great question. I think one of the new bands that we've seen really take off and be a huge success based on new technology and new ways of thinking is the CBRS band. That's the Citizen Broadband Radio Service, the 3.5 gigahertz band. This was really an impressive collaboration between the FCC, NTIA, DoD, industry writ large, and it really highlighted the way that government and commercial sharing can work together in a cohesive, coexisting regime that allows us to not only continue the US tradition of innovation and technology advances, but also adding competition and expanding spectrum use across a wide variety of users. The CBRS band, the way that it was designed was to allow for existing federal government incumbent users of the spectrum to continue to be able to operate their really critical uses. One example of that is the Navy, which operates radars within the band. The FCC also then designed another layer of licensed spectrum, shared licensed spectrum, that was then put to auction and saw the most diverse group of auction participants and bid winners jumping in to want to participate in this auction and be part of the spectrum future. Here you saw not just companies like Charter, which was a CBRS license winner, but also traditional mobile network operators. You saw utilities, tribes, educational institutions, manufacturers, folks like John Deere, all jumping in. And I really think that speaks to just how incredibly important spectrum is becoming to a wide range of industries, and how we are thinking about the need to make sure that spectrum is accessible to a diverse set of users. One of the hallmarks of the CBRS licenses, really, that I think made it so successful was the fact that they had small county size licenses and low power operations, and really an innovative sharing regime. So it really did attract a whole host of new entrants, again, including Charter, who were able to not just increase access to 5G services, but also be able to implement licensed spectrum in a shared way for their own business use cases. So really, it's an exciting way to see how we are able to be balancing commercial, government, and national security needs in a band. And I think it really has been a huge success, and setting really the tone for how we're thinking about things and opportunities to do similar innovative sharing regimes moving forward.
Great. Michael, I know you have a raft of examples you could choose from. Can you give us one?
Yeah, so we already talked about a lot of mobile broadband unlicensed use, but we also have been very busy making more spectrum available for example, use for UAS at 5 gigahertz band. So we recently released a report in order that allows the drones to be able to have a greater coverage and network of a network to manage the flight of delivery drones from East Coast to West Coast. Also, we've been doing a lot of work on the satellite side as well, allowing GSL and NGSL satellites to be deployed and provide services. And you see a lot of news about our astronauts going to the space stations, and also NASA's mission to the moon. So it's very exciting topics, and we're working with all the relevant stakeholders to make sure that we retain the leadership on space front, and FCC is doing our part to support that as well.
So we've already seen spectrum allocations are in motion all the time as new technologies and user demands, migrate through the process, right? So we're always changing it. And perhaps, Fred, the Uber agency in charge of all this as spectrum uses change and evolve is the ITU. So could you give us a few words on the ITU and how the U.S. participates in that?
Well, the ITU has many radio regulations. I don't know how many pages. I claim there's 900 or something like that. Very hard, very long, lengthy, that have treaty status. United States is a signatory, and it's over 190 countries that belong to the ITU. It's one nation, one vote. So it's not like the U.S. is a major user of the spectrum as many European countries. We don't get any more than one vote. So every 3 or 4 years, they convene what's called a World Radio Conference, a WRC. They have an agenda, and they amend the table of frequency allocations and some other radio regulations. So in recent years, of course, there's more and more demand for broadband spectrum, the cellular types of mobiles. It all operates actually in a mobile service. The allocations table is divided into 40 different radio services, and cellular it belongs under the cellular under the mobile service. So that's always been a challenge there, and there's that's one of the challenges always on the agenda, to provide more and more spectrum. Repurposing, of course, is one of the buzzwords that's frequently used here in the United States, of course, in the ITU area also. That's repurposing that spectrum for another purpose. you mentioned the 6 gigahertz band. It's moving from fixed satellite and fixed service over to Wi-Fi services and licensed types of devices, where repurposing is a major challenge in the ITU. So we've been successful in our conferences. Our delegation is headed by a person who's appointed as an ambassador, and there's U.S. delegations, about 50 or 60 experts in the radio spectrum and the negotiation procedures and so forth, both FCC, NTIA, and private industry. Of course, when they're parts of the U.S. delegation, they must advocate for the United States positions that are developed there. Their own personal companies are really secondary, so that's another challenge that many of these delegates have. So the recent one was in 2023, and the I2 radio regulations are available free for a download right now. So we're already preparing for the next conference. So anyway,
I know that the U.S. Also pays a lot of attention to the Asia Pacific telecommunity, which is all the Pacific nations who gather to discuss WRC preparations and what their positions are on various agenda items. So U.S. government has been very engaged there in those meetings as well. So that's interesting.
Yes, before the conference actually begins, there's a lot of meetings, like 3 or 4 years before the conference, the bilateral, multilateral. So the United States participates in these meetings, like the CTEL, the European organization, and CTEL is an American organization, and so we do participate in those meetings in order to iron things out, make sure when the conference actually convenes, that everything is running smoothly already. These situations have been ironed out ahead of time. So that's
hopefully. All right. So we've only got a few minutes. We've only got a few minutes left. So I sort of want to jump to a future look question. So what can the Asian American Pacific Island community, what can this community look forward to as we look into the future of spectrum and spectrum policy? And how do we make sure this community isn't left behind, maybe on the wrong side of the digital divide? Let me start off with Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. So I think there's certain provisions that applies to continental U.S. versus Alaska versus Hawaii in certain bands. It's nothing to do with any different policies for different continents. It's just that how geographic location of the specific territories, and also what is installed from the military perspective as well. And Hawaii is known for a good place for radio astronomy observations. There's certain protection that needs to be done. Also, they were the first one to see any incoming missiles across the Pacific Ocean. So there are certain radar installations that the military manages as well. So there are varying degrees of differences, depends on where you are geographically. And we'll encourage the members of APAICS to kind of monitor some of the proceedings that FCC handles, and there will be ample opportunities to provide your feedback and comments, and they will be well considered as we formulate these very complex set of equations that we're trying to resolve. And certainly our role here is really striking a good balance of what industry needs, what appears to be fair, how do we coordinate and provide the necessary services to the incumbent users, including our federal users as well. So there's a lot of discussions and handholding we do. So please reach out to us and stay engaged.
Great, thank you. Virginia, you've spoken about sharing and coexistence being such a great engine of innovation. What are we looking forward to there?
Well, I think Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander communities can be found across all of America and are really going to be benefiting from these critical investments that we as industry and as my fellow panelists who are representing government, critical investments we're making to increase connectivity services and make them more accessible. So we see that there is going to be increased investment in wireline broadband. So we'll see. We're really excited about being able to reach more folks, but people don't engage with their broadband service by connecting via an Ethernet cable circa, my childhood.
I remember those days.
Yep. We want seamless wireless connectivity, and Wi-Fi is able to deliver that, and has really been at the forefront. And really, Wi-Fi was the original when it comes to a sharing technology. And then thinking about shared spectrum and coexistence technologies that really continue to advance in the US and overseas. We're really seeing ways that we're able to maximize and be more efficient with spectrum, allowing for increased bandwidth. And we're also seeing increased use of spectrum through these shared spectrum technologies and opportunities with a wider array of industries. And so just the increase of competition into the marketplace, both from a mobile marketplace competition aspect, is going to continue to help drive prices down for communities, API and others. And we're going to see broader adoption and use of innovative spectrum uses through shared and coexistence models. So it's an exciting time to be in the spectrum game.
Great. Rikkin, you're a technologist. Wi-Fi 8 is on the horizon. When are we going to see it?
Well, we are still a few years away, but yes, we need to get ready for that. Well, let me mention this way. No matter how we are getting our broadband connectivity inside the house, ultimately it gets converted to Wi-Fi. We are actually connecting our devices to Wi-Fi. Technical innovations that Wi-Fi industry and our member companies are bringing, that's amazing. And of course, Wi-Fi 7 is here now, was announced earlier this year, and that's going to improve upon the updates that came with the 6 gigahertz that we discussed earlier. These updates are definitely going to facilitate the next great tech advancements, and the use cases can be ranging from wireless gaming to interactive telemedicine, right? And all this is possible if we can get additional capacity, though, right? So as wired broadband networks are continuing to expand their performance to gigabits of speed and higher speeds, right? We need to make sure that access to the unlicensed spectrum doesn't become the bottleneck for the consumers.
Great. I want to stop you there because we're running up against time, and I want to give Fred just a minute or two on the National Spectrum Strategy, which the NTIA has been working on. Fred, tell us about NSS.
Well, the original document was a memorandum signed by President Biden in November 2023, last year, and it called for modernizing spectrum policy, and it also called for the development of the National Spectrum Strategy. I say nationals, not only NTIA, but the FCC and all the private entities and the companies and the carriers and so forth should be involved in the development of the National Spectrum Strategy. The White House then issued the National Spectrum Strategy, and then NTA issued an implementation plan on how to implement the strategy. So we're working on that. Right now, there's people looking at various frequency bands. There's 5 frequency bands, a technologist, engineers examining that. And 7 to 8 gigahertz was already mentioned. That's one of the bands under study. So that's used by military point-to-point microwave. Coast Guard uses that for its vessel control centers, microwave to microwave their radar, radio navigation communications back to their centers. So, and the FAA uses that for their remoting their distant radars back to their control centers also. So that 7 to 8 gigahertz is used quite extensively here. So that's one example. And I'm heavily involved. One of the things called for in the strategy and the implementation plan is the workforce development. How are we going to develop the future spectrum managers of people dealing with the spectrum and so forth? Because there's no a common training approach. Many of the spectrum managers have gotten their experience in the military and transitioned over to the civil sector as they either retired or left the military. So quite a few of the federal government spectrum managers have their background in the military. So we want to recruit from colleges and universities, historical Black universities and colleges, and we want to recruit and develop methods and to recruit and retain them, and also spectrum management training is kind of a loose end that there's no cohesive or common methods for that. The colleges don't have very many courses, and they're very few and far between, and it's really a happenstance. We did a survey of the federal agencies and how people ended up in spectrum management. Many of the responses just by happenstance. That was one of the conclusions that we've already determined. And we surveyed many of the leadership in the federal agencies and also some of the personnel staff, and so we got very good results. We're looking forward to developing the national workforce. There's a national workforce plan, which the FCC has to participate with us and develop that. We're going to issue a request for comments for the public and to get their inputs there. So hopefully that the trade associations and the charter will participate and submit substantial comments for us. So that's
So
kind
spectrum is also a people issue, right?
Yes, it is.
You need the people to be able to do all this work. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Staff and technicals. Many of the people are engineers and so forth. And my education personally was in communications engineering and so forth. I transitioned over to the policy and regulatory method, and it helps to have a technical background because you can understand the engineers who are throwing around the dBs, if you will. Decibel math, spectrum math is always so unique in this stuff, so we have to have an understanding of that. So anyway, so hopefully,
yeah, it can devolve into jargon, engineering jargon pretty quickly.
Yes, it is. So anyway, we're well on our way, doing a lot of hard work on the strategy. Hopefully, we'll achieve some of the president's objectives there.
Well, great. And on that note, the National Spectrum Strategy, I want to thank you all for participating today. It was very interesting to talk to you and hear your different perspectives about spectrum and its uses and how it's changing over time. And I hope our audience has learned something from this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.